Computer. Okay,
And one thing, when questions come in during the chat at the end, you'll read them back to them.
I'm gonna be tracking this.
Okay,
I'm
okay,
a production assistant.
take it away, Gad.
all right.
Well, it's really good to see a lot of familiar faces and some new ones, and it'll be a pleasure to meet new folks that are interested in our wonderful botany here. And we do have some amazing things. I hear about new plants being discovered when people do expeditions into tropical rainforests and cloud forests. But we have some mysteries right here in the Central Valley. I found out that most of the things that were conventional wisdom when I was in grad school turned out to be false. We have a place here in our Central Valley that's unlike any place else on Earth. We're still finding new species. It's the Central Valley has been identified as one of the most endangered ecosystems in North America. And it's a really special place. And there's that's because, of course, there's not much left of it, but there is actually. And we've got a plant explorer here in our midst from Kees Hood from UC Davis that's actually done some plant exploring, and we'll tell you about it tonight. So, Kees, take it away.
All right. Cool. So I'm Kees. I am a recently graduated undergrad at Davis, and I'm originally from SoCal. And when I came to Davis, was also when I started to kind of get into plants and try to learn plants. And whenever I learned and identify a new plant, almost all of them were non-native, and there was no it was hard to find real natural areas around Davis. So I've since the beginning been really interested in what Davis was like in the past and what this landscape used to look like before it was converted to a lot of agriculture and urban areas. So especially this past spring, I spent a lot of time kind of looking for places where a lot of native plants still thrive in Yolo County. And in this talk, I'm going to highlight kind of 3 lesser known places in Yolo County that have surprising native biodiversity. I'm focusing on plants, but a lot of these areas have plenty of unique animals as well. So yeah, these areas aren't well-known like Grasslands Regional Park or Woodland Regional Park or Glide Tule Ranch or Jepson Prairie. They're sort of smaller properties that aren't necessarily managed for conservation. But yeah, nonetheless, they still have plenty of native biodiversity. Let me move my cursor so this can work. Okay, so yeah, as Glenn was saying, the Central Valley is a really unique and somewhat bizarre landscape.
Kees, can you speak up, please?
Yeah, sorry about that. So the Central Valley is a really unique and somewhat bizarre landscape. It's sort of like the bottom of a bowl, and the Sierras and the Coast Range are like the rims. So a lot of water flows into Central Valley from the mountain ranges around it. Central Valley itself doesn't actually get that much rain compared to the rest of California. It varies from around 20 inches, 25 inches in Redding to sometimes less than 4 in the southern San Joaquin Valley. So there's a ton of variability and there's a ton of habitats. And traditionally, so the valley's been classified into a few specific subsets of habitats.
Use your microphone.
Oh, okay. Great. I'll just testing. Let's see. Testing. Hello. There we go. Great. So the Central Valley vegetation is often kind of grouped into several classifications like valley grassland or wetland or riparian, but that barely sort of begins to grasp the variability that really exists here. And it's such a large area, and it almost feels like every little remnant that you find here is different. And that's what really inspired me to keep looking for these places. So this is a map from the Geographic Information Center, Chico Research Foundation. It's an interactive map, and I just screenshotted it, and it's not very high definition, so I apologize. And the light gray is agriculture, and the darker gray is urban. And if we zoom in on sort of the greater kind of Sacramento Valley area that we're in. Here is Davis. Here is Sacramento. You can see that it's overwhelmingly urban or agricultural areas. And these patches of yellow, lighter yellow is like grasslands with vernal pools. Darker yellow is just grasslands without any like qualifying features. A lot of these areas that are referred to as grasslands are also just like fallow fields. This is just like a very coarse classification. So even these tiny little dots of yellow, a lot of them aren't actually like really surviving Central Valley habitat. So there's very little left. The destruction of habitats here like hovers in the 90s for most different habitats. It's very high. So it's really, really special to find a place that is somewhat intact and still has native plants. Yeah, so the areas that I'm going to be talking about in this presentation sort of fall into like California grassland or prairie. It's really hard to, that sort of habitat suffers from a naming issue where a lot of areas that are referred to as grassland don't have any real native grasses, but some areas do depending on rainfall, and a lot of areas were dominated, like in this photo, by native forests. So that area is sort of hard to define. I think there's a lot of progress now in recognizing the importance of forbs in this region. And then within those grasslands, you would have had vernal pools, which could range from gigantic lakes like Olcott Lake and Jepson Prairie to just tiny little depressions in the ground that only hold water for a few weeks. And then another type of vegetation that is very often just glossed over in like most sources is alkali sink and alkali prairie and the various alkali habitats. Yeah, so here's just some photos of areas sort of referred to as California grasslands. This is at Bear Valley, and it's like just covered in green cups and purple owls, clover, and just an incredible diversity of wildflowers. And this is Jepson Prairie, where you have some bunch grasses, but also lots of native forbs and Olcott Lake in the background. And then, yeah, here's some photos of vernal pools at Jepson Prairie. You can see there's sort of a discrete area where the vernal pools are, and then as you get higher up, it becomes non-native annual grass dominated. And then you can also have vernal pools like this one, where they're like the size of a bathtub. They're just tiny, but they're still plants that depend on seasonal inundation. So there's, again, there's just tons of variability, and no site is quite the same as the other. Yeah, here's Olcott Lake, which is just enormous at Jepson Prairie. And then alkali flats and sinks and alkali prairies, there's lots of different names for these areas. These occur in areas that are salty or alkali, and those terms aren't interchangeable, but I'm not going to go into detail about them. And these areas are mostly clustered in the western Central Valley. There's sort of runoff from Coast Range, formerly marine sediments, that create alkaline areas, and there's also lots of areas where water doesn't quite make it to like drainage basins, and it just sort of sits there and evaporates and just creates really alkaline, salty habitats. And there's a whole suite of really interesting native plants who specialize in living on these really tough, salty soils. And so to kind of learn more about the Davis area in the past, I looked into the archives of Beecher Crampton, who was a UC Davis like herbarium, who like ran the UC Davis herbarium in, I think, from the mid 1950s to the mid 1970s. And they did a lot of work with the alkali sink habitats because north of Davis, there was an extensive, enormous area of these habitats that ran like all the way up the western edge of the valley. The largest surviving section of this habitat is at Woodland Regional Park. But there's also little sections of it at like Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge and random roadsides if you're lucky. And so this is just a fun little drawing that Beecher Crampton did in his notes of just different alkali sink plants. And he has another one. It's a lot more stylized, but it sort of shows kind of how these plants like segregate with different elevations and levels of like water inundation. But alkali flats were a extensive and really important type of habitat in the Central Valley that you don't really hear about much. And there is a surviving section of alkali prairie, pretty much like right here in Davis. It's right across from the Julie Partansky Pond and that like north side of the greenbelt. For some reason, it's not been plowed very much. Like there's agriculture here and here, but then this section has just been left alone. And it's been left alone, although there has been some disturbance. It was used, the like Hunt like tomato cannery used to throw their like refuse and old like tomato clippings into the field apparently. And I think some people have tried to plow it in the past, and you can see this weird sort of like drainage ditch that was cut here. But so this area's been altered, but mostly been left alone for some reason. I wish I knew why. Could be the soil. And it's about 32 acres, and we've recorded 35 species of native plants. There's undoubtedly more, but we've only just started to kind of explore it. And there's a vernal pool right in the center, and then various kind of alkali flat vegetation. And it's also a really popular spot for migrating shorebirds and waterfowl. I think it's been a birding hotspot for a while, but there was plenty of very small native plants hiding there too. And yeah, this is one of the last remnants, apart from Woodland Regional Park, of a large alkali flat vernal pool area that used to cover a huge section north of Davis. And yeah, so this is another photo of it, just the other side. A bunch of Downingia there. And I was able to get access to some 1937 aerial imagery. And unfortunately, it's not as high definition as I'd like it to be. But you can see that like there's plenty of farming fields. There's also these areas that appear to be more natural vegetation. There's sort of strange contours and vernal pool patterns. And the area that I'm talking about is part of that. So if you look, compare here, the railroad ran through the same place in the past as it does now. So the site is roughly right here. And I don't know what is going on here, because someone has plowed these weird, like asymmetrical fields around it, but left this area alone. And so that was 1937. And in the 1940s and 50s, Beecher Crampton and John M. Tucker and a bunch of like people from Davis collected plants from the area. There's records of Astragalus tenor and plenty of different vernal pool plants with nice little annotations. I wish they wrote more. A lot of them are just like Astragalus tenor by the railroad tracks, and that's it. But Beecher Crampton sometimes reported more detail. And one of the species that covers a huge area of the site is saltgrass. Would have been one of the most common plants of the alkaline flats in the past, and Beecher Crampton notes that it was growing in alkali adobe soil covering large areas at edges of vernal pools and open ridges. And this collection was like half a mile north of this site, in an area that I think is now the Davis dump, or is like paintball or something. Yeah, the old dump.
So
Mm-hmm.
people online can't see where you're pointing.
Oh,
So I'm just letting you know.
yeah. Right, sorry, people online. I'll try to describe things better. But yeah, saltgrass is like tremendously important perennial grass. It's a relative of Bermuda grass, and so it kind of looks like it, like superficially. Flowers look totally different, but it's related to and it grows a lot like Bermuda grass. But it is a really important native species. People have used it as like a turf. Like you can kind of get it to grow like a turf grass. It's a host plant for the fiery skipper, which is a really cute little butterfly species. And it covers huge patches of the site. And along with that, there's of course the vernal pool plants. But here's a few more upland species. We have blowwives, which is every remnant that I've found. Blowwives is one of the most common species. I don't know what the origin of the common name is, but it's a really cool, it's actually a tarweed. It's the earliest diverging member of the tarweed clade. And then another tarweed, Centromadia pungens, which is, I think, called spikeweed. It's super common there, and it forms these wonderful little yellow carpets, and it's been blooming there all the way from like March, and it's still blooming out there. It just does not care about drought or 100-degree temperatures. It just keeps on going. So a lot of these native plants they're incredibly well adapted to salty, dry environments that a lot of other plants aren't so happy with. And so, oh, question.
I'm just curious, are you gonna tell us if these are accessible, and if so, how?
I will get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, so because this area is more kind of alkaline soil, the proportion of like non-native annual grasses is a lot lower. They're not as well adapted to these soil conditions, so the native plant cover is quite high here, and there's an annual grass you can barely see here, and the most common annual grass is actually a native annual grass, Hordeum depressum, like alkali barley, salt barley, are names I've heard for it. And it's a really cute little annual native barley, and really cool to see it thriving. And then here's just more areas, some popcorn flowers and a little swale and more of that spikeweed. And yeah, so there's some rare plants here too. Astragalus tenor, variety tenor, the alkali milk vetch is a very rare plant found in alkaline areas, mostly in the Central Valley, but a few occurrences in the Bay Area. It's found at Woodland Regional Park. It's found at Jepson Prairie, Glide Tule Ranch, but it's also found here, and there's a pretty substantial population. There's like about, would you say like 80 plants roughly? Way up, okay.
Yeah.
There's a substantial population of this rare species, so it's really good to see it thriving in an unlikely place. And there is a second rare plant, Extraplex joaquiniana. I think the common name is San Joaquin spear scale. And annual Extraplexes, they're not the most charismatic plants, and they're often overlooked, but I think they're very charming, and this one especially has a really sort of cute, like rose-colored flower buds when it's early in the season, and then those sort of fade away and it gets a lot more spiky. But yeah, this is another very rare plant. It used to be quite common on alkaline flats in the valley, and has since been restricted to areas where there still are alkaline flats. And this species also has a very robust population there. There's definitely hundreds of them. Haven't counted.
Turned off, Kees.
Oh. Testing. Oh, okay. Great. Yeah, if you guys can't hear, let me know as quickly as you can so that you don't miss too much. And then there's also lots of just your common cute little vernal pool species, Downingia pulchella, and then I think there's 2 species of woolly marbles. I didn't identify the one in this photo, but woolly marbles, Downingia. You'll see these same species at like Jepson Prairie or in a lot of vernal pools around Davis area and the Central Valley. And then showy Great Valley popcorn flower, Pygiobothries stipitatus, variety stipitatus. It's a really charismatic member of the popcorn flowers. A lot of popcorn flowers, they're somewhat hard to identify unless you look at the nutlets, and they're kind of an overlooked group of plants, but they're tremendously diverse and common in Yolo County in the Central Valley. And this species is one of the most charismatic, and it can form these really like cool looking kind of white sheets that it looks like someone dropped a bunch of popcorn somewhere. And then this really sort of like alien looking plant is Myosaurus dathyllus, the vernal pool mousetail. Other Myosaurus species, these sort of flowers look like mouse tails, and this one looks more like a lizard tail, but it's a really cool plant. And yeah, like all of these, it's a vernal pool species. It needs that seasonal inundation. And there's also California poppies. I'm not sure if these are garden like escapees or if they are part of the original vegetation, but regardless, there's a lot of them, and the native bees are very happy. There's a lot of these really tiny, like grain of rice sized solitary bees going in and out of the poppy flowers there. So a lot of habitats in the valley and California suffer from being sort of seasonally charismatic. They're really pretty and everyone loves vernal pools in the spring, but in the fall and the summer, a lot of people will look at this and just see like a field of dead, dry vegetation or weeds. And so that's been hard for Central Valley vegetation because people will see, they'll see a lot of the annual grasses that are non-native and conclude that it's annual grass dominated and therefore there's not, the biodiversity there's not worth saving. But so yeah, these areas suffer from a PR problem and you have to bring people out there to the right, at the right time to really get them to see the wildflowers, and hopefully from that they'll start to appreciate the less charismatic times of year too. Unfortunately, this area is very much threatened. Yeah, so it is currently proposed for a housing development. It's only about 8% of the total area of the housing development, and this isn't like a final plan. So I don't really know anything about like legal protection or anything or negotiating and talking with developers, but this is sort of just a open call to like tell people that this place exists. And I hope that, considering it's only a small part of the full site, that this area could be spared, and whatever happens to the rest of it, I'm not gonna pick sides, or my concern is this habitat area in the corner, and it's truly one of the last areas of its kind. If habitats could be listed, like species could, like these alkaline habitats would be like critically endangered. So it's really important, even little 32-acre scraps, to try to save what's left. So if anybody has ideas or has experience in protecting areas like this, please let me know. Okay, so the second site, the next two sites I'm going to talk about are less under immediate threat, like they're not going to be developed, and they are more so like grassland and vernal pool vegetation. And DQ University is a really interesting place. It's I think California's first tribal college. It was established in, I think, the mid 1970s. There's a lot of really interesting history that I think everyone should read up on and learn about. It's really cool. But unfortunately, the school has fallen on like hard times since like 2005, I believe. It's very complicated. I'm not really going to get into it, but the main thing I'm trying to talk about right here is just the habitat area that's there. So this area I called the DQ University groundskeeper after looking at herbarium records that show that there was Sidalcia there, and I've been trying to find native Sidalcia in the area for a long time. If those who don't know, Sidalcia is like a really beautiful group of like sort of hibiscus-like plants that have hot pink flowers. They're like just beautiful, beautiful plants. And I've been trying to find them in the area. So that's what led me to call the groundskeeper and ask if I could get access. And they said, yeah, sure, come on out. And I got like 2 hours to kind of run around there and take lots of pictures and marvel at this beautiful vernal pool. So there is a pretty large complex of vernal pools. There's one really big one, and there's several kind of smaller ones and little vernal swales, and lots of kind of grassland species, prairie species out there too. And there's abundant shorebirds. You can't really see them super well, but there is like a ton of geese and yellowlegs and various shorebird species that were very happy there and weren't happy that I was running around their home. And this area has received like more formal attention in the 1980s. DQ University students and a local botanist named Fleur, I think, really like got on it and like documented and made a plant list and a bird list. I believe there's been berry shrimp surveys there, which I'm still trying to figure out, like get the information on those surveys, but this area is known about and it is protected, but it is private property, so you have to request access to it. And the area isn't super actively managed right now. So the upland areas are pretty full of non-native annual grasses. Medusa head is really common there, and it forms a pretty thick thatch area. So some of the smaller vernal pools don't have much of a display right now. But the big ones, I think because of just, there was so many geese there that just grazed down everything. They opened up lots of room for these vernal pool species to grow. And yeah, so it's a really beautiful little section of vernal pools. It's really, it seems like every vernal pool is a little bit different. There's always like a different little mix of Downingias and Plasthenias and popcorn flowers there. Like no one pool is quite the same. And this one is unique in that you don't really have those really like showy displays of goldfields. Like a classic kind of vernal pool image is the Plasthenia goldfields, sort of bright golden yellow ringing the pools. But here you have Plasthenia glaberrima, which is a rayless goldfields. And yeah, it is completely carpeted in this species. And several popcorn flowers, which sadly I did not take specimens to identify when I was there. But one of the popcorn flowers is really strongly scented. I don't know if that narrows it down, but there was one popcorn flower that just had like a overwhelming, like perfumey scent that just sort of followed you wherever you walked there. So there's two species of Downingia there. There's the pretty common insignis, and then I think this is one of the westernmost, at least in the Sacramento Valley, westernmost areas where Downingia ornatissima exists. This one's a lot smaller. And this one is insignis is by far more common, but there's plenty of ornatissima too. And this also, there was a few unusual white flowered Downingia insignis. Like you see this around lots of vernal pools, like once in a while, but it was cool to see. And I wonder if the native pollinators can still like pollinate them when they're white flowered. We were able to observe the Downingia specialist bee. I think has not been formally described yet. I think there's one or two specialist bee species on Downingia, and we were able to sit there and watch them go back and forth and pollinate when we were there, which was really cool. And yeah, here's the Plasthenia I was talking about, Plasthenia glaberrima. And then once again, that showy Great Valley popcorn flower that's just all over Yolo County, where there's native habitat. And there's also some upland species. Blowwives, it's very recognizable when it has those like big puffs of white wind dispersed seeds, but when it's less far along in its phenology, it has just like a very laid back, tiny little flower. And that was extremely common there. And you can also find that along roadsides in the area. There's an almond field pretty close by that's like being overtaken by them. So I think they're moving back into their old habitat, and hopefully nobody herbicides them. And then there's lots of Tridolea hyacintha, which is a,
Your mic just died.
oh, no. Testing. Okay, there we go. Great. And there's lots of this Tridolea hyacintha, which I don't remember the common name on this one, but it's a bulb forming species, and it's really interesting because you can see it up in the Sierras along like creeks, but it also grows in like seasonally inundated Central Valley habitats. And this species, Beecher Crampton records it as being very, very common around kind of the Davis, Yolo County grassland areas. So Patricia is friends with Fleur, who worked a lot with the vernal pools there. And she was able to provide me a photo from 2006. I think it was more like mowed or grazed or something to keep the vegetation down a little bit more back then. And also just from perhaps weather patterns or just other random things. There's a lot more Downingia in this photo from 2006 and a lot, seemingly less of the popcorn flower. So it's interesting to see how sort of different management and potentially different like water years can change the species, at least the visual species composition out of these areas. And yeah.
So was that site, was that DQU or was that the one by the cannery?
These have all been DQU.
Okay.
Yeah, all of these past
Okay.
photos have been DQU.
Okay.
Yeah, here's another photo from 2006. You have like Lots of that Downangia, popcorn flower, Lastenia glaberrima. Yeah, so this site, yeah, DQU, there's a really, really awesome complex of vernal pools there, and it's definitely worthy of more kind of botanical exploration. Fleur and the students at DQ did a lot of collecting there in the 80s, but undoubtedly there are more species to be found there. There's also several species that I wasn't able to relocate, like the Sidalcia that I originally went to go find. There's also a very small vernal pool monkey flower, Diplacus tricolor, that was recorded there in the past, but I was not able to find it. And these species might be there, they might be extirpated, or they might just be in the seed bank waiting for the right year. But definitely a place to, if you can get permission, go and visit and see for yourself. So the final site that I'm going to be talking about is the smallest of the ones I've been talking about, and it definitely doesn't have the flashiest name. It's a little L-shaped section of grassland, prairie kind of habitat on the corner of the Winters wastewater treatment plant. It doesn't smell bad or anything around there. It's a pretty popular spot for birders as well. I was taken there by some friends who were looking for birds, but I didn't lift my binocular once I got there, because there is a really showy display of wildflowers out there. The predominant kind of really pretty ones that immediately caught my eye were lupinus bicolor, this really deep blue lupin here, and then purple owl's clover is also really abundant there. It's really nice to visit in like early April, late March, and it's kind of incredible that there's really high like native plant diversity there for a tiny L-shaped corner of the side of a wastewater treatment plant. I think that it just, by like all these areas, just by quirks of history and geology and other things, just haven't been plowed or like extensively grazed, and just have survived getting super disturbed. And this area, like, along with the really showy like owl's clover and lupin, there's also tons of geophytes. If you look in this photo, all of these little sort of grass-like blades are Rhodea elegans, and that's the thing at the site. They're all like, the geophytes grow so thick they're like the grass. And there's also lots of non-native annual grasses there, of course. It's kind of interesting in that there's almost every non-native annual grass there. There's goat grass, there's Medusa head, there's avenas, there's 3 species of bromes. So it's interesting to see that not only are lots of native plants coexisting, but there's plenty of non-native grasses, and the native plants still manage to survive. I think part of it is that the city mows the area for fire safety once or twice a year, and that keeps the thatch from building up and suppressing native plants from germinating. But yeah, so there's abundant geophytes along with rhodeas and blue dicks. There's also ethereal spear or Tridolea laxa, and they all kind of have this interesting sequence of blooming where the blue dix starts first, and then the Tridolea starts to bloom as the blue dicks are fading away, and then later in the season the rhodea just sort of turns the whole area speckled with dark purple. And there's also several other interesting species there. Valley tassels is a really common species that people don't see super well because it's not a very flashy wildflower. It's like purple owl's clover without the purple. It's like a paintbrush, but someone's painting with white paint instead of purple. But it still has that really cute owl pattern right in the center of the flower. And then also, I believe, as far as I can tell, this is the like farthest east in Yolo County record for snake root or Syndicula bipinnata. That's a hard scientific name for me to pronounce. Yeah, there aren't a lot of sites in the valley where this species is recorded, and so it was interesting to see it. This area isn't too far into the actual valley. It is definitely on flat ground, but it's only a few miles away from the foothills. And it's abundant at the site, and it has really interesting colored flowers. They're sort of like a deep purplish red, and it's not really the color that I see on flowers that often. And they're a relative of carrots, and I believe the roots are edible, but please don't eat them because there's only like 18 of them there. Please, just you can go get carrots from the store. And this area, you might think that like in summer it wouldn't be a great place to visit, and you wouldn't be a lot of wildflowers there, but this area has, along with its abundant spring wildflowers, has a really intact group of summer annuals. So you have this really gnarly tarweed here, Centromatia fitchii, Fitch's tarweed. It combines the classic tarweed gooey trichomes with just razor sharp spines. And it's highly abundant out there, and it may stab you a little bit, but it's really cool to see. Very popular with the bees. And along with this species out there, there's also tons of vinegar weed, a very polarizing plant. Some people think it smells great, some people think it smells like vinegar. And you can kind of see this picture was taken like a week and a half ago, but the area still looks pretty green considering it's the middle of summer. Because these like summer annuals just have incredible ability to just grow in the hottest parts of the year. And they don't germinate in summer. If you go out there in like April, you can start to see the little tiny sort of like rosettes of them, but they just sort of sit there as rosettes and they don't quite bolt until later in the season. There's also yellow star thistle there, but it seems to kind of avoid the areas where these two plants are growing. I don't know if that's just the soil thing or if there's some sort of resilience when there's multiple other summer blooming plants out there. But overall, the site is really rich with native plants. There's also popcorn flowers, Amsynchia, lots of weird little like acmespawn, little vetches, and there's lots of native plants out there. There's also a swale, which I didn't have time to talk about, that has tons of milkweed and what's the name? There's this bright pink flowering. I'm not going to remember it. There's a bright pink. Yes, Zeltnera or Centaria. These just bright hot pink flowers growing in the swale there. So yeah, it's like 2 acres. It's tiny, but it's still worth a visit if you're in Yolo County in spring, and has really abundant wildflowers. And I hope the city of Winters knows or could find out about it and just know not to, to continue managing it as they're doing, because whatever they're doing to it now is working just fine. Unfortunately, the area does suffer from off-road vehicle traffic. And there's like, especially this past winter, someone really like went crazy and left a lot of deep tire tracks, which the tarweed liked and completely covered all the areas that had been torn up, but it's probably not good for the long-term health of the area. And I think someone else, there's like a giant pile of this like bright white, like powder, like stuff there that I think is some sort of agricultural, like, probably gypsum that someone just sort of dumped out there. So area it's not being actively, like it's not going to be developed or destroyed, but it's also not actively being managed for. And probably like a nice little fence. It's totally accessible. A lot of people walk their dogs through there along the road, but maybe just a nice little fence that with a gate or something would help stop people from going on joy rides through the area. So that's my talk. But yeah, essentially, I just wanted to highlight some areas that people don't really know about as much, as far as I can know, in Yolo County, that have really cool little populations of native plants. And it's good to get more people out to those areas just to see them and also cherish them and hopefully advocate for their protection. And yeah, I'm open for questions. Yes, in the back.
Can these areas be improved over the long haul with cultural or prescribed burns?
Definitely, yeah. It would be hard to pull off just because of all the regulations, but I would love to see them be prescribed burns, especially DQ. I think really would benefit from a prescribed burn. The Medusa head is probably the most common grass there, and most of the studies that I've looked at, Medusa head really does not like fire. So I would love to see them prescribe burned if that would be possible. Yes.
I just want to make a comment about the soils. Beecher Crampton apparently identified that one side it had on the Pescadero soil. Pescadero soils are throughout North Davis, and you can see them from the road anywhere in springtime, in a cornfield, in a pasture. You can actually see where these plants used to grow. The Pescadero is a real special soil. It has a lot of salts associated with it sometimes. Sometimes it's just stratified with silt and gravels, and it's really messy soil, which is an answer perhaps to why that area you're talking about, as I'd suggest that it either has not been formed because it is a Pescadero, or it has been scalped for its topsoil sometime in the past, and left leaving behind an exhumed Pescadero soil. Interesting. I'll carry this into the DPU of the Myers clay, which is a very water penetration resistant clay there, I'm guessing. And then the winters, I don't know what that, the winters, I should know what that soil is. I don't know what it is around that like treatment plant, but I'll take a look.
Yeah, if it helps, it's very rocky and bright red.
Yes, well, that whole subdivision that's there in that corner next to Shirley Longer School, there is a big vernal pool with a reserve there, that I've talked to, Shirley Longer School, elementary school, right there, there's a wall, I think Rod, didn't you go up there?
I was out there once before.
Yeah, we've been out a few times to look at it, and it has some nice trunk things, and it's been at least somewhat protected.
That's good to know.
These are, I'm not sure what the soils are, I have to take a look, but they are restricted drainage, obviously, there used to be a lot of them down there, and I don't know that they came in with regulatory wetlands, which is one of the problems, but it doesn't really have a lot of the indicators for the regulatory wetlands.
Somebody on Zoom said they missed the location of that soil in winters.
Oh,
Is it possible
let's see,
that he was, no, I think the comment he was.
oh,
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't really think that was used.
oh, let's see,
It just
okay.
says, I missed the location.
Soils out there.
Sitting there.
Pescadero, Myers Clay, are the one, the Rocky Red stuff. You've actually given us a soil tour of that part of the county, which is very good in addition.
Great, yeah, it's cool to see.
Is it near Shirley Rominger School?
I think so. If you just type in like Winters wastewater treatment plant, it'll take you right there. Yeah, it's harder to spot in the summer when it's sort of like a field of dry grass and native summer annuals, but in spring it's just bright purple and blue. So that should help you find it. And it's really cool. It's really cool to hear about the soils, because I think I'm going to talk to you after, because I'm really curious about how these communities are structured by soil, and it's really hard to learn about that when there's so few areas left to like have a kind of compare the different soils. Yeah, and it's cool to hear that there's another vernal pool out there. If anybody knows of other little scraps and remnants like this, I would love to hear about them, because I'm sure there's more. Cool. Any other questions?
Did you mention when you did, or when you took these photos, or when you did these surveys, was it this previous spring, or was it a?
So the Winters wastewater treatment plant photos are from the past 2 springs. The rest of them were all over the past spring. So thankfully, lots of rain. So the vernal pools were really in their prime.
Did you mention the accessibility of the first site in Davis?
Yeah, so that area, it is private land. When I visited originally, I thought it was a city drainage, retention basin, because it superficially looks a lot like sort of the West Pond or those other areas. There are no trespassing signs posted, but it is private land, and yeah, the access is a little bit iffy on that one. When I took a lot of these photos, I did not know that, so.
It's
Yeah.
okay, you're
Yeah.
it's okay.
Sorry, guys. Yeah,
The land at the cannery, I live at the cannery and I've walked that area many, many times. And if you go and just small groups, 1 or 2 people, I was fine. If you leave a troop of 100 people, you might attract attention.
yeah, I think a lot of people like walk their dogs and walk along the kind of path through there a lot, so it's not like this private property, but it's pretty well trafficked by people. There's like a large like encampment of like unhoused people that's like on one side of the property. So it's private property, but it's not very strictly enforced. If the landowner tells me to never come back, then I will never come back, but hasn't happened yet, so I'm gonna enjoy it until or if that happens. Cool. Yeah,
Yeah, the property under development, that'll go through a series of reviews by various commissions in the city of Davis. I think the Open Space and Habitat Commission is aware of that. And Patrick Huber, that I believe has had some discussions with the property owner, Johnny Wickham. He's a fairly open fella, and if you wanted to get together and make a case on why that land should be preserved and how that would best serve him perhaps in the upcoming election, because that will have to be approved by voters, he may find out, you may find him very receptive on that. Anything to get the vote approved, I think he'll be willing to listen. So talk with the Open Space and Habitat Commission, and I can put you in touch with Tony Wickham.
okay, that's good to know, thank you. What, any other questions? Or, yeah,
So I'm wondering if you've, like, been in contact with Department of Fish and Wildlife, the state department, especially their new protections for bees and bee habitat
ooh,
and
interesting.
listed bees.
I am not, but maybe I should be.
Yeah, I could, I'll talk with you after.
Cool, yeah. Okay, oh, another question.
The back border of the, what is it, sewage treatment plant in winters, it's like the plants in there are a little different, and I was just wondering, is it possible that they planted native plant seed along that strip, or is that really what was? I mean, I don't even know if there's companies that would put blueprints and owl's clover in, like, that's even done, but
Yeah,
I did wonder about that.
I thought about that for a while, but almost all the species that are there aren't commercially produced for restoration. I wish they were, but Centromatia fictii is not popular with the restoration community. And I think owl's clover is almost it's very hard for people to grow. So yeah, I'm pretty certain that it is native vegetation. The soil is very different from some of the other valley areas. Like the plants seem more similar to like what you'd find kind of in the coast ranges and like the sort of slopes sloping up into the kind of oak woodland areas. So I think it's probably a soil thing.
Your comment about burning was interesting, and I'm wondering in particularly the DQ site could be, that would be a site for burning, and that goes Middleton and campus, who teaches in Native American studies, has done those burns in other places. It seems like lots of the tribal connections, DQ, whoever is in charge there might be interested in that.
Yeah.
A connection for that goes.
I have heard of them, but I haven't spoken to them yet.
I can definitely put you in touch with her. I'm not sure who she would get in touch with at DQ at this point.
Yeah, I'm currently trying to get in touch with folks at DQ.
Uh-huh.
I got in touch with someone who used to do like berry shrimp surveys out there, who I think sort of knows the leadership. So still trying to get in touch with them, but yeah, I'm hoping that I can, and potentially it'd be cool if there could be some sort of collaborative effort to like steward the biodiversity out there.
She likes to do those teaching burns in different places locally, so.
Yeah, it's a lot of these like valley habitats they're like founded on all sides by like roads and like fields. So it seems like theoretically they wouldn't be that hard to burn because they're already surrounded by a fire break. But yeah, I wish more areas were burned more often. I wish Jefferson Prairie could get a nice prescribed burn soon.
I don't know whether you know anything about the history of burning at Jefferson Prairie. But at this point, it comes down to Solano Air Quality Control District. And we tried for years. In fact, we did it until we found out that the land trust had no liability insurance. So then we stopped.
Oh, well, yeah, I have read the papers about the burning at Jefferson Prairie, and it's like one of the most successful prescribed burns in terms of like native species recovery that I've ever seen. Like Medusa head went from
Oh, yeah.
fairly common after the burn to like it was gone in all of the plots that they had, and it's crept back now. But like burning in these areas is very, very effective. There's some species that don't appear to like it that much. Amsinkia in some of the fire papers that I've seen doesn't seem to like burning that much. Clarkia also doesn't, but a lot of these species really like to be burned. And I hope that it seems like prescribed burning is becoming more popular as an idea recently, and hopefully that continues.
Yeah, I was just comment in terms of burning, the Yolo County RCD is now sponsoring the Yolo County Prescribed Burning Association.
Oh,
And they did their first trial burning work with KP last month, I think, and so many of their initial burns will be for fuel reduction, but hopefully down the road they will start looking for burns in terms of habitat restoration. So that organization getting geared up, I think it's a good possibility.
that's great to hear. Yay, prescribed burning. Cool. Well, if anybody else, if there's no more questions, I'll check the Zoom chat really quick.
I've been tracking.
Oh, great.
But there's no questions.
Cool.
Could ask them.
Yeah, does Zoom folks, do you guys have any questions? I guess not. Okay, well, thank you for coming, everyone.
Or we will sit through that one.
Okay.
Thanks, Kees, for showing us some wonderful places close to home. Also, there's a wonderful place that's easier to access than some of the places that Kees showed. Patricia Carpenter is going to have a summer ramble this Sunday, starting at 7 at her wonderful native plant garden. And are you back there? Yes, this is a lady, see her and get the directions. It's a wonderful place and a great thing for native plants. And also the person that suggested those people to talk to about preserving these areas, could you bring those people's names up here so we could write them down so CNPS could follow up on that? I think that was a great idea too. These little places need protection. They're not so spectacular, but they're around us, some of the last little remnants of what we have. So that would be a good thing to get those names up here for us. Thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that I want to talk to after this. So yeah, great. Hope you guys enjoy it.
Thank you.
So I'll stop the recording.
Yeah.
People on Zoom, so you'll have a presentation.